Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to the Tuesday, February 11th edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, the man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen, and we're getting into it with some breaking news. This is breaking news just coming across the internet here, and we're going to share it with you. I'm going to give you the rundown of the show before we jump into it. We're going to talk about compounds and how long they're going to be available with some new information today from the FDA. We're going to talk about Tirzepatide 2.0, the next generation of GLP-GIP from Eli Lilly that nobody is talking about. We're going to talk about Trump talking about the fat shot, and we're going to get into the scrutiny facing hims and hers over the Super Bowl advertisement. We're going to get into all that. But before we do, I need you to hit that like, hit that bell, hit the subscribe button that helps get the information that we put out on this channel out to the rest of the world. We thank you so much for those who do that each and every week. For those who interact in the comments, thank you for being here. As the podcast has moved to a live podcast, we're bringing you the news live now every Tuesday at noon. So set a reminder so that you can join us every Tuesday at noon like Jennifer Nebraska does. So let's get into it. Some breaking news from the FDA, and this is really big. I didn't even have time to put an article up at onthepen.com because this is brand new information. So let's go over it together. This came from Scott Bruner, who is the CEO of the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding. Their previous statement from the APC was basically that the FDA had given them assurances via email that the FDA did not plan on doing any enforcement action against compounders during the trial. Now, this morning, the FDA released further clarification, and this is very interesting because it is a deviation from what the APC had originally shared. So let's read this together. The FDA has not changed its intention regarding enforcement discretion as described below. To clarify, the timeframes during which the agency does not intend to take action against compounders for violation of the FD&C Act arising from conditions that depend on Tirzepatide injection products, inclusion on the FDA drug shortage list that was a mouthful. This is where it's important. For state licensed pharmacy or physician compounding under 503A section of the FD&C Act until February 18th, 2025, or until the date of the district court's decision on the plaintiff's preliminary injunction motion in the OFA versus FDA, whichever is longer. For outsourcing facilities under Section 503B until March 19th, 2025, or until the date of the district court's decision on the plaintiff's preliminary injunction motion in the OFA versus FDA, whichever is longer. FDA may still take action regarding violations of any other statutory or regulatory requirements, such as to address findings that a product may be of substandard quality or otherwise unsafe. So what's the change here? Well, the change here is really that previously we had been told that compounding would be allowed, or rather, to use the more accurate language, the FDA was going to hold off on enforcing anything against compounders for the duration of the trial. Now it wouldn't seem, now what the FDA has telegraphed via this statement is that the FDA plans on extending those dates if the judge has not issued his decision on the preliminary injunction in that trial, whichever date is longer. So that brings back into focus the importance of the preliminary injunction, because as we had mentioned before, Had the FDA stuck with what they told the Alliance for Pharmacy Compounding, the enforcement wouldn't have happened during the trial at all. Now, what the FDA is clarifying is that they do indeed intend to enforce if the preliminary injunction is not issued in this case. So it brings the importance of that back in focus. Of course, nobody has followed this closer than on the internet than on thepen.com. Please make sure you jump over to the website, sign up for email alerts to stay on top of all of this information, as it is such an evolving landscape. Things are changing often. We're plugged into industry insiders, so we bring you the best, most accurate, and up-to-date information. I want to take this moment to thank our sponsor, Ro. Ro is the sponsor of this podcast. Ro.co/OTP is where you can learn more about their Ro Body program, where patients lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupling GLP-1 medications with lifestyle modifications. Ro gives you access via the most amazing platform on the internet to doctors who can prescribe these medications where medically appropriate. Of course, if you're going to start a new medication, you need to make sure that you're familiarizing yourself with all the important safety information about that medication, including potential side effects. All of that available at ro.co/OTP within a couple of clicks. Thank you, Ro, for being the sponsor of this podcast each and every week. You are the reason we're able to continue to do this, so we thank you very much. Moving on to some new drugs. We're excited about this one. I always get excited to talk about new drugs, and this one, honestly, is one that I originally missed during the earnings call that happened last week with Eli Lilly. Now, if you want a full rundown on that earnings call, you got to look no further than this YouTube channel. We did a great rundown on that earnings call, and you can go back and check that video out. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about was something that was missed, mostly because I just don't have the greatest eyesight. You see that? See what happens when wow, it's that bad. But this was an interesting one buried on a page in the slide deck, which we did also upload to onthepen.com. Looks like it's not letting me upload it here, so I'll just have to go off my phone. But this is an interesting one. When we talk about the future and the medications that are on the horizon for anti-obesity and diabetes and cardiometabolic disease, the one that people get most excited about is retatrutide, right? Retatrutide is the triple agonist. So it takes GLP-1 and GIP, the two hormones that Mounjaro and Zepbound mimic. So that's GLP-1 and GIP. Retatrutide takes a third and adds glucagon to that. And adding that glucagon component really ramps up the weight loss. It really helps to melt off liver fat. Just some really amazing things that we're seeing early on in the data from retatrutide. Now, there seems to be that there is still quite a lot of interest in the scientific world, in the drug development world, in the co-agonist GLP-GIP. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because we have covered extensively a company called Viking Therapeutics that has what we have dubbed Viking Tide, which is their own version of GLP-GIP molecule. It's going to be available in a oral formulation, also a subcutaneous injection, showing much superior results early on in clinical trials to Tirzepatide. We also see that Novo Nordisk has an early stage GLP-1 GIP candidate. I believe that's phase 2. So you see that Tirzepatide probably has some opportunity for improvement upon the molecule, whether it's binding affinity or whether it is adjusting how much the ratio of GLP-1 to GIP is and what sort of effects you get when you alter that ratio. Eli Lilly has a new GLP-1 GIP co-agonist in phase 1 clinical trials. And I find that very interesting because what that says to me, well, first of all, for context, it's being studied under the banner of cardiometabolic disease. So not obesity, not diabetes specific, but under cardiometabolic disease. So it'll be very interesting to see how this one shapes up, because there's obviously some opportunity for improvement over what Lilly has seen even with retatrutide, but with Tirzepatide, the GLP-1 GIP coagonist. So you see a lot of the players in the field are moving to improve upon the coagonist model. Novo Nordisk, Viking Therapeutics. You see, I believe Amgen has Maritide, which actually blocks GIP. So the coagonist or coagonist and antagonist seems to be of continued interest to the community enough where the future generations, the additional agonists being added to these medications may not be the be all end all. So very, very interesting information. And I hope that you'll continue to stay plugged into onthepen.com because we will be following this all the way through clinical trials. I just found it very interesting. I've sort of in the title of the video or the thumbnail kind of put the next generation of Tirzepatide. This is not Tirzepatide, though. This is actually a whole new molecule that acts on GLP-1 and GIP like Tirzepatide does. So be very interesting. Now I want to move along to some interesting comments from President Trump. And President Trump had some interesting things to say to Brett Baer on Fox News this weekend about the rising cost of medications. Now, we've already reported that prior to President Trump's inauguration, he was out there talking about getting rid of the middlemen. We got to get rid of there's these middlemen in the healthcare industry, and it's not going to be very popular to them, but I'm going to get rid of them. So we have yet to see President Trump get rid of the middlemen, but he's talked about that. PBM reform is a huge topic of conversation on this podcast when we talk about advocacy to the medicine, but he talked about the price of medications and how potential tariffs could impact the short-term costs, but then juked to the potential actions that they may be taking to improve the cost of medication overall. And I thought that it was worthy of bringing to the podcast. So this is compliments of courtesy of Mediaite, and Mediaite is bringing it to us compliments of courtesy of Fox News. So let's listen to this together.
And you're not worried that any of that's going to go back to the consumer?
It might, but it's ultimately going to be much less expensive. I'll give you an example. The so-called fat drug or fat shot, whatever it's called, Ozempic or Mounjaro. In London, you get it for $88. In New York, you get it for $1,200. You can't even buy it. It's very unfair. The identical package made in the same factory, shipped to different places, but made literally in the same factory. In London, it's $88, and in New York, it's $1,200, and you can't get it. And the reason is because everything's added on to the United States because the United States has been too nice. You know, I had transparency done, and Biden canceled it. Transparency would have solved that problem. But I'm going to solve it one way or the other, including, you know, they have a certain thing like rent control in New York, and I don't like that. But at some point, it's not fair that other countries, you go to Canada, all of the drugs are much less expensive. I suggested that some of the governors should go buy their drugs in Canada and send them back to here. It's very simple.
So very interesting comments from President Trump on the fat shot. You gotta love the language. My goodness. But Ozempic and Mounjaro, kind of comparing the cost overseas in Europe to the cost Americans pay for these medications. And so I think the win for the community from an advocacy standpoint is this topic is on the mind of the president of the free world. Now, what he does with that, how he lives up to that, is all something that we'll follow very closely here at On the Pen, because these are two things that have to be addressed bigly. We've got to address the issue of PBMs and PBM reform, but also the cost of medication. The list price of these medications is unattainable for people on the margins with insurance, and we have got to do something about that. So we'll be following this thread closely. I thought it was worth a mention from a policy and advocacy standpoint, though, that this is something that is on the radar of the current administration. Of course, we hope and we call on the Trump administration to continue the work that the Biden administration had been working on towards the end of their term. We saw the Biden administration make a huge move towards Medicare and adding obesity coverage to Medicare by way of a policy change with Medicare. And I hope that we see this current administration continue to evolve that and move it forward so that we could see maybe even in 2025 coverage for obesity for GLP-1s, because it currently is against the law for Medicare to cover medications for obesity, going back years and years and years, trying to protect Medicare patients from a lot of the harsh stimulants and amphetamine drugs that were used to control weight and for weight management. So we'll continue to monitor that very closely here at On the Pen. Some interesting words about the fat shot. Moving on into investor news this week. We did a video on this earlier this week. We talked about the Hims and Hers Super Bowl ad. We talked about this. I don't know. This was like prior to the Super Bowl. We dropped a video about this. We talked about the things that we felt like it was deficient on from a advocacy standpoint. So I won't belabor that conversation here, but if you want to get the full On the Pen take on the Hims and Hers commercial, the reason I'm bringing this up in the context of investor news is you've seen the stock of Hims and Hers climb almost 50% in the last month. Just amazing growth for Hims and Hers over the last month. And then they released the Super Bowl ad, which really drove their stock higher. So there's been some criticism now that this thing has aired on the Super Bowl. I think that one of the things that we've seen is some of the obesity advocacy groups come out very strongly against the Hims and Hers ad. Some of them touched on some of the stigma, some of the imagery used, and the weight bias that was sort of played on in this advertisement. But universally, what we've seen post Super Bowl is we've seen Novo Nordisk come out and make strong statements against Hims and Hers and compounding in general, going so far as to say that they are untrustworthy, unverified, unapproved, saying all these things that have elements of truth to them. Compound medications are not FDA approved. They are, by and large, essentially copies of the branded medication, right? Which is what the 503B code allows for, as we talked about at the top of this broadcast. One of the things you have to understand about these advocacy groups when they start talking against compounded medications is that they're largely funded by big pharmaceutical companies. So in no world are they going to come out and say anything positive about compounded medications. You've seen even the American Diabetes Association come out with strong statements against compounding. It's because big pharmaceutical companies, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, are vehemently anti-compound. And so what you see is these trade organizations sort of towing the line of big pharma. Now, I think some of the worthy criticism of this advertisement when it comes to regulatory issues is that there really was very little mention after mentioning that there are weight loss medications that work. I'm using weight loss in air quotes simply because we like to refer to them as addressing metabolic disease rather than weight loss shots, but it's not as zippy when it comes to an $8 million Super Bowl commercial. Some of the fair criticisms, I believe, is that if you listen to a commercial for a pharmaceutical drug, you're going to see about 20 seconds of commercial, and then you're going to see about 10 seconds of potential side effects and warnings, right? You did not see any of that in this Super Bowl ad. In fact, very illegible at the bottom of one quick blip of the ad. There was a statement in there about how compounds are not FDA approved, about how these medications require prescriptions, et cetera, but it wasn't readable. So it definitely was not held to the same standard that a pharmaceutical drug would be held to. And I think this is sort of the position of pharma all along with compounds, is that there are nowhere near the stringent quality and safety checks and balances for a compound medication that pharmaceutical drugs are required, basically hoops that pharmaceutical companies are required to jump through for the FDA. And you see that no more than the opening of the Concord plant in North Carolina, where Lilly was supposed to have online already. Where they have been, sorry, I have really dry lips. It's disgusting. Where it's very cold here in Iowa. All of a sudden it decided to turn winter And so all of our skin is dry and all of our bones are shaking and miserable. So you got to love it. But the Concord plant was already supposed to be online. And of course, this stuff has to be FDA approved. It has to be, I hope to tell more of that story, because those are things that frankly, compounders are not required to do. So when you talk about offering cheaper medication, they don't have to run clinical trials. They don't have to get FDA approval. They simply just have to make a copy, and they aren't required to jump through all of the same hoops that are required by the FDA for pharmaceutical companies. So same thing in this commercial, right? Sorry, there's a very long-winded way of getting back to the point that I'm trying to illustrate, is that along the lines of some of pharma's frustrations on compounds as far as how they can make them, they're not held to the same account when it comes to selling that medication either. And so it's not really an even playing field, right? And so I think some of the criticism is warranted from Big Pharma, but I always think you have to take everything with a grain of salt and consider how people benefit or not financially. Whether you're watching the Hims and Hers ad and you're thinking about who benefits from this and what's fair, and then you talk about Big Pharma and their influence over trade organizations. I just think, what we really aim to do here at On the Pen is to bring you straight information, just information about straight down the line. Like, I would not consider myself pro compound. I wouldn't consider myself anti compound. I wouldn't consider myself anti-pharma or anti-compound. I'm neither. I try to play this down the road. Is what we want to expand safer access to the highest quality of medication for as many people as humanly possible. And that's what we continue to advocate for at On the Pen. So I hope you enjoyed this update. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you're listening on Apple, Spotify, Google, make sure you leave it a 5-star rating and review, because that is what will help you to get this message out, right? So I bring the content. That's my job. Your job is to help us get it out to the rest of the world. And you've done such a marvelous job doing that. We're over 2 million views on YouTube now after just shy of, I think we're just over 2 years of making GLP-1 content. We are over the 100,000 download mark on the podcast. We are hitting about 1 million views a month on TikTok. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you, because you doing your part is what allows that to happen. Now, the one last thing that I wanted to bring up is about the Hims and Hers. This is kind of a point that I had intended to make at the end there. The Hims and Hers commercial, what I think it really did so importantly is it started a discussion in the greater conversation that society is having around not only obesity and weight loss, but using medication to treat that disease. That's the part of the commercial that I wish it done a better job of. The medication is treating a disease. It's not a weight loss shot. It's treating a disease. But it started a broader conversation. I'm seeing this pop up in areas that don't normally have these conversations. And that is what this entire Decoding GLP-1 book is about. It's a guide for friends and family of those on the pen, so that we can elevate this conversation with the people in our circle. I always say, we can't control what advertisement Hims and Hers puts out. We can't control what the Obesity Society has to say in response to it. We can't control what Novo Nordisk or Big Pharma has to say. But we can control our little circle and our sphere of influence. And what bothered me the most as I started creating content on YouTube and creating community is that so many within the community were afraid to have these conversations with the people that mattered most in their life, the people that they have the most influence over in their life. And they were afraid because of the stigma and the bias that exists because there's a lack of education around obesity as a disease. So we wrote this book, Decoding GLP-1, as a guide, not about how to use the medication, not a guide about what shots to take or what dose to take or how to deal with side effects. We wrote it about learning about the medications and how they work, and that obesity is a disease, by telling 10 different stories from community members, so that people could be equipped to have more intelligent conversations and more deep conversations with the people that they love around them, so that they could impact their sphere of influence. And this past week, Amazon decided that it would be appropriate to ban this book. So this book has been, without any warning, without any super great explanation, removed from Amazon and classified as a medication guidebook. And what I'm trying to articulate with Amazon right now is that it's not a guide on how to use the medicine. It's a guide about how to combat stigma and bias against the disease of obesity, something that we've all been fighting for a very long time, and something this book was being so effective at achieving for so many people. If that's you, put "that was me" in the chat. And so Amazon's decided to ban the book. I'm hoping that cooler heads will prevail now that we've sort of got it out of the AI loop. I've gotten responses that aren't patently and blatantly from AI. I've gotten from people. And so right now, what I've been told by Amazon is that the book is in a holding pattern where they have to manually review the book. And so I'm hoping that once it is manually reviewed, that Amazon does the right thing, that they don't discriminate against obesity and don't perpetuate the bias, and help this book get out there, because the book is serving as a useful tool to the community the way that it was intended when I spent my summer writing this book and putting it together for you all. So that said, there are a few copies left. You can kind of see them behind me. There are a few copies left. If you go to glpbook.com, it forwards to an article that I wrote on this last night. There are a few books left, and I want to get the few copies that I have, because I don't know when I'm going to be able to run more of these. These came from Amazon, and I don't know when it's going to pop back up on Amazon. But I want these to go to the people who need it the most, and I don't want cost to be a reason that you don't get it, because who knows when I'm going to have more of these available. So if you need this book, I want you to go to glpbook.com. It's going to take you to the article, and just throw a donation of any amount to the links listed and send me an email with your address. I will get these books sent out while the supplies last. There aren't very many of them left, but I want to get this in the hands of the people that need it the most, and this is what I have to offer for now. In the meantime, if you want to continue to fight, please just share the content. Please just like, save, share. All the information exists at onthepen.com. Sign up for email alerts, do all the things. Thank you for your support in all this. All you know, this has been a very frustrating thing for me to deal with. Like, I put my heart and soul into everything that I do here for On the Pen. So to face this, because it's not only this where we've dealt with big tech censorship. We've dealt with it. I'm still dealing with it on TikTok. Almost every video that I make goes into a review queue. Some of it gets hit with a what do you call it? Community violation. And it's literally, I'm giving the news. We're giving the news to people so that they can have more competent and confident conversations with their doctors. That's what we've always done here. It's what we'll continue to do here. And I can only do it without you. And I thank you so much for really propping me up the last few days amidst my frustration. And I'm just so thankful for this community. So thankful for all of you. Yes, they removed a hashtag that we had. Amazon silences obesity was removed from TikTok. So we're not strangers at On the Pen to big tech censorship over this topic. That's why we'll continue to fight, and we'll continue to fight harder. They can remove our book, but they can't remove our community. They can't remove us. Make sure that you go over to onthepen.com, sign up for email alerts, because that is honestly, like, who knows when, today it's TikTok and Amazon, tomorrow it may be YouTube and Facebook. We just never know. We never know, and we never have control over these platforms. But if you want to stay in touch with if you want to stay in touch with the content that we make, the best place to do that is onthepen.com. So, wow, I just said a lot of things. But thank you more than anything. I appreciate all your support, your love, and your compassion towards one another and towards this channel. Until Thursday night, where we've got Round Mound of Zepbound, a OG community member. Charles is going to join us to share about his journey, not only with using GLP-1 medications, but his journey with cancer. And he's just got an amazing story, and he's been around in this community for a long time. So make sure you join us at 9 p.m. Central on Thursday. We can't wait to see you there. If you missed last week's episode, it was our 100th episode. I hope you'll go back and check that out. It was such a great show. Shared some real personal stuff there. So I hope you'll go back and check out that episode with BJ Davis from last week. Really, really was a great time reminiscing on what we've accomplished at On the Pin and what we've done as a community, and just kind of looking forward. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do. We'll catch you on the next one.